Sometimes you get the feeling that you are not quite alone, but as you look around, there is no one there. Yet again, there is that feeling like there is someone standing right behind you. It is one of those common feelings of paranoia everyone gets once in a while. But in one instance in history, it seems that this feeling was quite right, as the students of a girls' school later swore their teacher had a doppelganger standing always right behind her. Even though she could not see it herself, Emily Saget had a twin, like the image in a mirror. But it was not a twin, nor a ghost. This was a doppelganger, and this phantom figure haunted Emily Saget her entire life. Hello and welcome back to Certainly Strange. This is episode 2 of the second season of Certainly Strange, and I am just so glad to see you back here. Today's story is a good one and also a very, very strange one, and it is also quite long. So long even that this was actually supposed to be a season 1 episode, but it just took a little bit more time to research, so here it is in season 2. So grab a cup of tea, I already have one beside me right now, and let's get into it. The year is 1845. In Livonia, which is modern-day Latvia, just outside the small town of Vorma, stands an institution of high repute, the Pensionat of Nieuwelk. It is an institution for the education of young ladies, and that year there are 42 young ladies residing between the walls of that school, and most of whom are the daughters of noble families. One of these girls is Julie, the second daughter of the Baron de Goldenstube, who later told a very strange story about one of her teachers. Julie was very taken with this particular teacher, a young lady from France. She was pretty, with light blue eyes, chestnut hair, something like Mary Poppins, and she was the kindest person in the world. However, there was something very strange about this teacher. A few weeks after Emily Saget first arrived in the institution, her students noticed that she appeared to sometimes be at 2 places at the same time. Where one student had met her on the staircase, another had seen her in the corridor, all at the same time. One day, Emily Saget was giving a lesson to a class of 13 young ladies, and she was writing something on the blackboard with chalk when the young ladies suddenly saw not one but 2 Emily Sagets standing right next to each other. They were exactly alike, and they used the same gestures, only that the real Emily held a bit of chalk in her hand and did actually write words, whilst her double had no chalk and only imitated her motions. Soon after, one of the students, Mademoiselle Antoine Durand, was going to a party, and Saget had good-naturedly volunteered to help her get dressed. And she was hooking her dress from behind, and Antoine just happened to turn around and look in a mirror where she saw that not one, but 2 Emily Sagets were hooking her dress. The sudden apparition of this second ghostly figure shocked her so much that she fainted. Months passed, and the second figure of Emily Saget never really left. Sometimes at dinner, the double appeared standing right behind the teacher's chair, imitating her motions as she ate, without knife and fork or food. The double just repeated the motions of Saget in silence. But the double did not only repeat the motions of Saget like a mirror, no, sometimes the figure moved all on her own. The most remarkable example of this happened when all the young ladies of the institution, to the number of 42, were assembled in the same room engaged in embroidery. It was a spacious hall on the first floor of the principal building, and it had 4 large windows, giving entrance to a garden of some extent in front of the house. There was a long table in the center of the room. On this particular occasion, the young ladies were all seated at that table and all looking out on the garden. While they were all engaged in their work, they saw Emily Saget there, in the garden gathering flowers. At the head of the table, seated in a green armchair, sat another teacher. After some time the lady left the room and the green armchair was left empty. This was only for a short while, however, as the figure of Emily Saget suddenly appeared seated in it. The young ladies immediately turned their heads to look into the garden, where they all saw the same Emily Saget still gathering flowers. But there she sat, in the armchair, silent and motionless. The young ladies were all quite certain that this double of their beloved teacher was not a real person. And so 2 of the boldest of the girls approached the figure and tried to touch it. They claimed that they did feel a slight resistance, but they compared it to a fabric of fine muslin or crepe. One of the 2 girls then passed close in front of the armchair and actually walked through a portion of the figure. The figure, however, remained. Eventually, it gradually disappeared, like the fading of a photograph. For about a year and a half, Emily Saget continued to work as a teacher at the institution. But of course, such an extraordinary phenomenon cannot go unnoticed by the parents of her students. Sometimes girls would become too alarmed by the sight of Saget's double and they would faint. And of course their parents started to complain about the school when people started telling stories. And one after another, as they went home for the holidays, failed to return. At the end of 18 months, the number of students had decreased from 42 to only 12. Though the true reason was not assigned to the directors, they all knew it too well. Eventually, Emily Saget was dismissed. When she heard about it, the poor woman was in despair, remarking that it was the 19th time that she had been let go of a position because of her strange double. After Emily Saget left New Elk, she went to live with a sister-in-law who had several young children. Julie the Goldenstuber went to see her one day and learned that the children of 3 and 4 years of age all knew of the strange double of their aunt, but they weren't afraid of it. After all, they loved their Aunt Emily, and they were lucky that they did not only have one Aunt Emily, but 2. So the story about doppelgangers is not entirely new. In fact, the doppelganger is actually an important figure in the mythology of many cultures. For example, in ancient Egypt, there is an entity known as Ka, which means double spirit. And this Ka is said to contain the same feelings, memories, and emotions of its living counterpart. So that is basically, a phantom form of yourself. Basically, I want to say a soul, but that doesn't really capture it. I believe it is like a non-material form of oneself, and that is a car. And in Scandinavian mythology, there is and excuse me for the pronunciation, a vardog. If I'm reading it, just the word, it's vardoger. Vardoger. It is a spirit that serves like a sort of backward echo of a person. So it is a sound or sight of a person before this person arrives. And he or she has this person's appearance, voice, scent and footsteps. And it appears before the actual person arrives, which causes witnesses to claim that they have already seen or heard a person before they are actually, there. And it's not all mythology, however. people seeing their doppelganger has actually been heavily reported in history. One example is the famed English romantic poet Percy Shelley, better known as the husband of Mary Shelley, the writer of Frankenstein, and he actually saw his doppelganger several times in his life, and some of the occasions have actually been retold by Mary Shelley in her letters. On one occasion, during a trip to Italy after his first 3 children had died, Percy Shelley was severely depressed and he was ill and tired, and then he suddenly encountered himself when he was on a walk. He saw himself standing on the terrace, and so he approached his doppelganger, who also approached him, like he was walking towards a mirror. And when they were standing face to face to each other, the doppelganger actually said something. It said, "How long do you mean to be content?" Mary Shelley actually said that she knew that Percy saw his doppelganger quite often, and it was often when he was feeling very bad, when he was feeling sick or depressed. And Percy saw his doppelganger the last time that he saw it was standing on a beach, and his double approached him silently, and without speaking, it just pointed at the sea. And not long after, Percy Shelley drowned and died. This is because doppelgangers are actually considered bad omens. They are warnings of premature death. That is true not only for Percy Shelley, because another person who saw his doppelganger was Abraham Lincoln. It was after his election in 1860 when Abraham Lincoln threw himself onto his couch in his chamber. And this is actually something that he wrote himself. Opposite where I lay was a bureau with a swinging glass upon it, and looking in that glass I saw myself reflected nearly at full length. But my face, I noticed, had 2 separate and distinct images, the tip of the nose of one being about 3 inches from the tip of the other. I was a little bothered, perhaps startled, and so I got up and looked into the glass, but the illusion vanished. On lying down again, I saw it a second time, plainer, if possible, than before, and then I noticed that one of the faces was a little paler, say 5 shades, than the other. I got up, and the thing melted away. And I went off, and in the excitement of the hour I forgot all about it. Nearly, but not quite, for the thing would come up once in a while and give me a little pang, as if something uncomfortable had happened. When I went home again that night, I told my wife about it, and a few days afterwards I made the experiment again when, sure enough, the thing came back again. But I never succeeded in bringing the ghost back after that, though I once tried very industriously to show it to my wife, who was somewhat worried about it. She thought it was a sign that I was to be elected to a second term of office, and that the paleness of one of the faces was an omen that I should not see life through the last term. Without knowing, Abraham Lincoln's wife had accurately depicted the events to come. He did get elected a second time, and in 1865, well, we all know what happened. Lincoln was killed. What makes the story of Emily Saget so different from the others is that she herself never saw her double. And besides losing her job over and over again, the doppelganger seemed to not be a bad omen of death. And there is one other thing that differentiates Saget's story from the rest, because it is not entirely sure whether Emily Saget ever existed at all. But before we go on, a word from one of my friends over at the Brewpot Network.
Are you interested in stories of ghosts, poltergeists, and the paranormal? Do you love an amazing tale of an unsolved mystery, a strange disappearance, How about a UFO encounter, or even a first-hand sighting of a creature that should only exist in your nightmares? Why not join us over at the Haunted UK podcast, where every 2 weeks we delve deep into the tales of the strange and unusual, the unsolved and the downright weird. The Haunted UK podcast is available on all major platforms, as well as being on Instagram and Coffee. So why not give us a follow and get involved with the show? Thanks for listening, and we really hope that you'll join us for our next episode. And on that note, it's back to the show.
That was Haunted UK podcast, and doesn't that podcast just sound great? Make sure to check them out. But before you do, let's first talk about this strange Emily Saget. Emily had, according to the story, worked in at least 18 different schools because she said that she had been fired 19 times. Yet, only one person ever spoke out about it, and that was Julie, the second daughter of the Baron of Guldenstube. She had told the story to the American author Robert Dale Owens, and she and her brother, they claimed to have psychic powers, and in fact they were fairly famous spirit mediums for that time. And Julie was a member of both high society and spirit circles in France, along with her brother, who led the group. And who was one of those keen members of the circle who travelled to France to witness the powers of the brother and sister? Well, that will be Robert Dale Owens. Looking at birth certificates, there was indeed a family Saget living in Dijon at the time, and in 1813, one Octavie Saget was born. This Saget would be the exact age Emily Saget was when she taught at the pensionnat of Nieuwelk, and Octavie was an illegitimate child at the time. And it was common for young ladies to change their name to avoid prejudice. Or perhaps, maybe the Baroness had simply misremembered the name of a teacher after all the years that had passed. So basically, Octavie Saget could indeed be Emily Saget. Even though I would not be able to understand why someone would change their first name, like changing Octavie to Emily, but not changing your last name, because that would be the entire point of changing your name when you are an illegitimate child, wouldn't it? But next to a birth certificate, there is nothing else found on Octavie Saget. There are no death certificates, no records of employ, and that is actually a bit strange for someone who supposedly worked at so many places, in a way, twice. It is actually the same thing about the pensionnat of Nieuwelk, where this entire story takes place. There are actually no records that this school ever existed at all. Which again is very strange for a place that claims to have such high reputation. So either this Baroness Julie de Guldenstube was just a big fat liar, or she just misremembered some things and history hasn't really kept track of things well. So it could be either one of those things. But it is, certainly strange, which is the name of the podcast. But yeah, personally, if you ask me if this ever really happened, what I find very interesting is that there are multiple accounts of people seeing their doppelganger. So you have Abraham Lincoln, you have Percy Shelley, who have, Mary Shelley and Abraham Lincoln have both written letters, have actually written accounts of seeing the apparitions. I believe there's also an instance where Queen Elizabeth I also saw her own burial, I believe, which is also being recorded. So I do really find that phenomena very interesting, entirely, like, besides the whole Emily Saget thing. I think that Emily Saget actually personally, I don't think that she existed. Not because I don't think that this could not be possible or something. I mean, that is, there are some unexplainable things in the world, but just because there are no records of the school existing, and I think if there was a school in, like, it isn't even that long ago. It was like 18. What time was it again? It was 1845. That's actually not that far away. That was in the time of Queen Victoria. So I do think that if records ever existed, if a school existed at the time, records would exist of it. So I do really find it strange that there are no records to be found about the school. So I actually think that this Julie person, especially since she's like this acclaimed psychic, I really think that I should take everything she says with a grain of salt. I'm just not a fan of mediums. I think there's a lot of mediums that are just, liars, playing with other people's feelings just to get money. And I actually suspect this Julie person to be one, because it is just really strange if you tell an author just like, oh, there were like 42 people of us and we all saw this and that, and it was so strange, and she worked at 19 different places in her life, and there's only ever one person coming forward with this story. If this was real, there would be more accounts of it, I think. But that is just my own personal theories and my own personal opinions about the matter. And I would actually love to hear your opinions and your theories about it. You can always contact me or message me on Instagram. It is Certainly Strange the podcast on Instagram. Just send me a DM. I love to talk. And thank you for listening to this second episode of season 2 of Certainly Strange. Everything about the podcast can be found on the website certainlystrange.com. And there you can also find the transcript of the episode and the sources that I used in my research, which include a fully transcribed original story as it was written down by Robert Dale Owens in 1860. So the entire story that Julie told Robert Dale Owens about Emily Saget, I transcribed it so that you can read it. And once again, thank you for listening, and hopefully I will see you soon. Bye.